All right, everyone. Welcome to Kremlin File.
Welcome to Spooky October. In today's episode, we are going to interview former CIA counterterrorism chief, Stephanie Hartell.
She's an expert, in cyber issues, malicious actors, data collection.
Extremists.
Also in counterterrorism, right? In Southeast Asia, and the CIA's Counterproliferation division as well. She served in the Middle East, but I'm really also excited about speaking with her because we don't get the chance to be able to speak with women operatives. And I think it's something that is absolutely, yay, exactly. And so I'm really excited.
Yeah, no, me too,
really
too.
Excited.
And I'm very excited to look at, the crossroads between extremism that we're seeing in U.S. and the disinformation that's being generated by Russia. I think it's a very important, thing to delve into.
Yep. So without any further ado, let's welcome Stephanie Hartell to the podcast. Hi, Stephanie.
Hi, Stephanie.
I hate to say it. A lot of our guests are men, but it's wonderful to talk with you and your experiences. So really, sincerely, thank you.
Thanks very much. I feel like I'm representing a lot of CIA women. There are a lot of really badass CIA women who been around for decades.
We'd love to know more about them. So that's, that's important, right? For everyone.
Yeah, I agree.
And I studied, at university, I studied military history, just to give you a bit of a thing. So I was amongst, probably in my master's, there were 12 of us and I was one woman. There were two of us, 2 women and 10 guys. Okay. So, they treated us with kid gloves. Nobody ever gets into this stuff. So, we're, that's why it's so exciting. I'm so excited. It's like, wow.
It's funny. When I started at CIA as a lawyer in the litigation division, I was the only female in a big department of men.
Wow.
And at one meeting, they said, "We see you as a man." I'm like, I don't know. That's so nice.
Exactly. That's the same. I was like, oh, wow. It's nice to be just treated as a person, right? Just, your stuff, your thing, and you're making your contribution. And, it was quite a pleasure. But let's start right from the beginning. I don't know if you can use any of that, but it doesn't matter. Yes.
Yeah. For women, sadly, we have to work like twice as hard. Like, hi.
We're
here.
Actually, Olga and I were talking about this before, either Olga puts out a tweet or, either I put out a tweet, and until a guy comes along and says, oh, this is happening, then everybody says, oh my God, So let's welcome, let's say officially, we started the conversation in medias, but, Stephanie Hartell, welcome to Kremlin File.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Yes,
Thank you.
Happy to be here.
We're truly happy to have you here. And this is just a heads up, Stephanie, before... actually, we're going to be talking today about something that is, I think is a fundamental issue. And Olga and I were talking about this even before, because it touches every single citizen of all ages, all extractions, everything. Okay. Yep. And this is about the information war that is ongoing. Okay. And people just don't give it the weight, in my opinion, of what they should. And also how this information war has produced extremists. And with your experience, Stephanie, in counterterrorism, in the CIA, you can shed a lot of light on this for us today. So, but before we do, let's go back a little bit, because we do want to ask you something about how you started. Now, not back to 1917. Wink, wink. That's a little joke there. Not all the way back to 1917. But can you tell us, how did you get into the agency?
Yeah, so I was in law school in New York, and I was planning on working at a firm in New York, and I'd actually already accepted an offer to work at a firm in New York. And I had a professor in law school, a woman who used to work for Janet Reno, and she just was really into elevating women.
Yeah.
And getting us, into more important positions. And she suggested to me that I interview with the CIA as an attorney, because there's a huge cadre of attorneys there. And I thought, well, it was just a coolness factor. I'm like, well, CIA, that's extremely cool. I think I'll go down and do it. So I went down to DC and I interviewed, and, they did various steps, and I ended up getting an offer. And I immediately abandoned my New York firm.
That's it. I'm out of there.
Yeah, even though it was, it was like more than twice the money. I'm like, this is just too cool. And even when I was being interviewed by CIA, they were like, why do you want this job? And I'm like, well, there is a coolness factor to this job.
Exactly.
And even being an attorney there is fun. It's cool, interesting, fascinating. So
Yeah.
That's
Let me ask
amazing.
you. Yeah, it's crazy. Let me ask you, Stephanie.
Cool.
Yeah. Oh no, definitely. In your experience with the CIA, was it difficult being a woman in the CIA? I know we touched about before how it's difficult to be taken seriously, right?
Yeah.
Did you have any of that while you were working in the CIA?
to tell you the truth, I didn't. And
Okay.
I mean, I think that every organization, every big organization, CIA included, could stand to have more females in high positions. But they do. I mean, Gina Haspel, the former director, 20 years ago, she was the chief of stations. It shows you that there were females in senior positions a long time ago. And she was a former boss of mine when I first jumped over from being attorney to the Counterterrorism Center. So, it's really interesting being a female operations officer because, they never see you coming.
Yeah, they're just not expecting it. Right?
No.
Or in the Middle East, for example, they wouldn't think, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's no question about it. I mean, they just don't take women. I mean, women don't exist in any meaningful way in Middle Eastern society, at least in the Gulf region. So they do not take women seriously at all. So I was actually encouraged when I was in the Counterterrorism Center. They sent me out there as a person who would interact on behalf of the CIA on counterterrorism issues. It was kind of funny. Like, here I am, CIA has sent me here and you're going to have to deal with a woman. And it was kind of funny.
Yeah.
Same with Soviet Union. I mean, they have a lot of women, not for the right purpose. And they had a whole department in KGB to get compromise on Westerners, but they looked down on them. I mean, it was not like, how here with CIA, it's on equal footing. So whenever they would encounter like a CIA female there, they would be like, huh? What? No,
exactly. Yeah. You're in the headlights. They don't know what to do. So that's an advantage. I think CIA recognizes that advantage. And therefore, I think that, women, minorities, there's so many, aspects of the cross-section of U.S. society that CIA definitely has in their tool belt and uses. So it's not all Harvard white guys anymore.
Yeah. In fact, Chris Burgess was saying the exact same thing, last week on the podcast. Exactly the same. Diversity. That there's a need for diversity and stuff like that. Exactly. Olga, why don't we get into some of the experiences now with Stephanie?
Yeah. So, Stephanie, you've written that you spent a good part of your career at the CIA fighting to keep extremist groups at bay abroad. Then we saw, January 6th, the coup happen. And I mean, literally, it was a terrorist attack on our capital. Do you think, and it was done by homegrown terrorists, did you see similarities in the tactics and, what was happening between the same tactics that they used and here?
Yeah, I mean, it really struck me because, I had done counterterrorism for years after I left being an attorney at the CIA. After 9/11, I jumped over to counterterrorism. That was my first job over there. And it was just striking and chilling because I also had experience at that point with Russia. And I saw the same tactics being employed. So you have, you have the terrorist attacks of 9/11 and other things. You can see them. They're tangible. They're horrible. That it really struck most U.S. citizens, and it really unified U.S. citizens. But the January 6th insurrection was fomented not just by Trump but by Russia, and so it's like radiation. You can't see it, and so there's no good rallying point for American citizens to say we are being attacked. We have to take up. We have to do our own part to counter this, and I think the Russians and Trump were able to whip up this base of disenfranchised people, which are the same type of people that perpetrated 9/11. They're disenfranchised. just kicking around the Middle East. I mean, those are the people that terrorist groups like to target to be able to perpetrate terrorist attacks. They're willing to, conduct violent jihad against the United States and against any enemy. So that Trump was able to employ the same exact tactics. And when the gallows went up outside the Capitol to hang Pence, I thought, I've seen this. I walked by, the gallows in Saudi Arabia and seen where they hang people. This is not America. And I think that, Russia played a major part in January 6th, and the fact that there are American politicians who are willing to dabble in that, who are willing to dabble in the strength that Russian disinformation can do to help them stay in power is a dangerous road to go down. And our democracy is so delicate. It's
and you wrote a piece on in Washington Post exactly on that, discussing how the similarities that you saw, with your work overseas. And as far as with Russia, I mean, what do we do with this? Because we have the Republican Party who for the past 4 years have been aligned with Russia. How do we go forward with this when one party is so willing to work with our enemies Russia's goal is to destroy us. They don't want a functioning America. They want to implode us and destroy us. And that way they can, have control and as well as influence around the world. What do we do with that?
I mean, part of it is education. It's really difficult in the United States. Like I was just saying, it's so hard to see the cyber disinformation. People, for example, I was just this morning looking at my Facebook feed and people are sharing memes and they don't know where those memes came from, but they're catchy. So, Russia's they're like water. They're able to infiltrate the United States in ways that people don't even realize that they're kind of become soldiers for the Russians. And I think that, it's not just hyperbole to say that these members of Congress have become soldiers for Putin when they spread disinformation and they know better. These guys have gotten the briefings and they totally understand what they're doing, but they got a taste of power. And I mean, I'd like to see the numbers of how much money and donations they get every time they're able to say something to whip up the base that, makes a disenfranchised person feel better for all the wrong reasons. So, Russia is able to so beautifully take those issues that are divisive in America and exacerbate them with the help of U.S. politicians. I think that, Estonia is a great example. I don't know if the U.S. could ever mount anything like Estonia has in, having its people being engaged in recognizing and rooting out Russian disinformation. But I think it's the greatest threat going. Right. It's like radiation. You can't see it. It's not like 9/11 that you can rally. People don't believe you. When you say, look, this meme is Russian. They're not targeted at Republicans. They're not targeted at Democrats. They're targeted at both. And they're to get us fighting. And they do beautifully. So definitely. I think the social media companies, I think social media companies could do a lot too, to educate and to root out the disinformation. I proposed in one article that they have an award system for people who are able to root out, Russian disinformation on one of the platforms. I think there should be a segment in the U.S. news if we're going to have RT on our broadcast over our airwaves. We need to, we should have something to counter that in a meaningful way. So to have a news reporter explain what, Russian disinformation is and what's been found that day. They do things like that in Estonia. Let's do it here.
Yeah, I read the article. It was absolutely fabulous. You named it the cyber militia, right? A well-regulated cyber militia. I mean, we've talked about Estonia quite often. Hey, Olga.
Yeah.
Well, because they have their shit together, right?
They do.
They're on the front line. They, had to combat this kind of stuff right from the get-go. There are other nations as well. They're all neighboring nations. And like you were saying, Stephanie, the more awareness that citizens have, then it's a lot better.
Yeah. So in Estonia, I mean, they understand the threat of the Soviet Union. Or Russia. So I mean, they're right on their doorstep. And so all of the people truly understand. I think in the United States, people look at Russia and they're like, well, I don't know, they're white. They kind of look like us, and they're not like Middle Eastern, dark-skinned terrorists. And so therefore, we don't really understand what the threat is. Is Putin such a bad guy? And they don't really understand.
Yeah. Well, there are also a lot of connections, right? You have the Orthodox Church. There's a lot of, Christian Orthodox Church.
Evangelicals, and absolutely.
Exactly.
Yeah, but
so
that's what
they don't see it as a negative, right? That's where they.
And that's what Russia has, done. They've infiltrated every part of our society, including churches, militias, everything. I mean, you name it, they're there. And I've said that 1,000 times. Like, if, Russia had dropped a bomb on New York, for instance, the country would rally and see it as a war. Yeah. Here, they are responsible for more deaths than, any military attack, between the COVID disinformation, between what they're doing, that people have lost their family members. They don't speak to their friends because of what's happened and everyone becoming so polarized. And people don't understand that we're at war. They launched a war, at us. And here we're still debating is Russia a threat? Maybe we should look at China. They're bigger. Meanwhile, every day from morning to night, the minute you pop on social media, that's all you see is Russian disinformation. And that's...
Yeah. Actually, Stephanie, let me ask you, we know, right, that why is it we know that disinformation and these kind of operations, they're an extremely powerful tool. Okay. In your experience, but why? Why should we really be paying attention to this kind of thing?
Well, I think that a good disinformation campaign confirms beliefs that are held by people in some way. I mean, when you look at Russia's history of disinformation, you can go back to 1917. But I mean, a more recent example is that AIDS was created by the Pentagon by a germ warfare experiment going wrong in Africa or something. That was completely made up. But it's somewhat comforting, I think, to Americans at the time to think, yes, AIDS is something foreign. It came from somewhere foreign. And it's not something homegrown. And it just confirms our own biases that we have. I mean, disinformation is professionally, the hook is baited really well to make you say, even I get stuff on Facebook being a disinformation specialist, and I'll look at it and say, yeah, exactly. I agree with that sentiment totally. And then you look up the meme that's if you do a little research on who's posted it, it'll go back to, Kosovo or some other random location. They're not an American at all. So I think that's the essence of why it works so well, is that it confirms biases that we have, that we hold, things that make us feel better about ourselves. And once they've hooked you, then they're able to spread more readily. Once Monique, you see that I like a page, then you are more likely to like a page, and Olga's more likely to like a page.
It's happened to
me,
and then it
lots
just
of times.
Spreads
like a virus.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and sometimes it's not just disinformation, outright. Sometimes they'll, have information to get you hooked and then start feeding disinformation. So it's like not full out disinformation.
Yeah. I mean, they definitely start. You see that a lot with the evangelicals. I mean, the Russians really, really understand the elements of our country and the divisions in our country really, really well, frighteningly so. And so you have a lot of memes or a lot of these Russian disinformation campaigns start with a religious, set of information they put out. And it's just Jesus stuff. It's just, combating Satan and things like that. I mean, there was a famous one that was a meme that was put out as confirmed Russian disinformation by Congress that showed Jesus staring down the devil and, share if you, love Jesus or something. And then we're off to the races. And then they've got their claws into that base.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Also, I mean, as you said, I think getting back to what you said, it's invisible in a certain way. No, we don't see the people behind it. And, we have this idea, and maybe I don't know if you agree or not, that we're not at war, but we actually are. Yeah. And we've talked to a lot of other analysts. This is what they say. We're at war. If you actually acknowledge that you are, then you can actually get out whatever you need, right, to combat it. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think that, one of the challenges for the United States is what to do in response to Russian disinformation. I think a lot of things are, the American sensibility is fair play. And I think that if we ever did to Russia, first of all, what we're capable of doing to Russia in the same way that they do to us, it just wouldn't sit well with an American. They wouldn't sit well with their sense of fair play. And so these are all things that the Russians just don't care about. I mean, Putin doesn't care about it. If we were to take down the power grid in Moscow in retaliation for a known cyber attack against the United States, I mean, people would die in Moscow if we took down the power. That's something that if Putin did to the United States, he wouldn't care about. Putin would take down the power grid in Moscow if it would serve him well, and he doesn't care how many people would die. But I think for Americans, they would.
Yeah, I think that's actually one of the big problems of why we've lost the grip of handling Russia is because we think with Western values and Western laws and, whereas, even like people like during the Ukraine buildup, people are like, oh, well, the Russian Navy, Putin's not going to do this. I said, Putin will kill 100,000 of his military people. He does not care about people. If anything, it's less pension to pay. And then just grab, another 100,000 and train them. And so for him, he's playing with no boundaries. He doesn't care about life or death. He doesn't care who, whether his people suffer, Westerners suffer. Whereas we, when we plan a response, we think about, following Western law and following, the rules and values. And to fight an enemy like that, sometimes it's hard because you have to know how they think in order to be able to respond appropriately back to him.
Yeah. And the Kremlin will also issue denials. And I think that most Americans are like, well, maybe they didn't do it. Maybe Putin's right. And they just don't get it. And I actually think that if Americans more greatly understood it, they'd be unified and it would be fun to be able to, fun's not the right word, but it would be a very patriotic thing and rewarding to be able to help. Everyone needs to get in the fight to counter disinformation. It's, fundamental to protecting our democracy. And if everyone in America, could help in that regard, that's the only thing that'll stop it, I think.
Yeah. Now, a lot of your observations, Stephanie, does this come on the Russians? Does this come also from experiences in the Middle East? Did you know that they were operating there? I mean, we know that they were, but I mean, what did you find when you were?
Yeah, I think so. I served 2 stints in the Counterterrorism Center, and so back in right after 9/11, I didn't see a lot of Russia, but my second stint there in 2013, I mean, Russia was doing in the Middle East what Russia does best, which is having absolutely no role in an issue like Syria, but inserting itself as a player.
Yeah, just getting in there. Right.
Then all of a sudden you have American politicians saying, well, we need to go through Russia to solve the Syria problem, to solve, to negotiate with Assad, to, deal with Iran. And really, Russia is so insignificant. I mean, they're really a very poor country with nuclear weapons. And so I wish that, if I had one wish for all American politicians, is that they'd stop even paying any attention to Russia when it comes to solving, any big political issue.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yes, I did.
By the way, it happens here as well. It's not just in the States. I mean, the previous government, not this one now in Italy, but the previous, yes. But we know that they were hooked up. So
I roll my eyes when I hear, "Oh, we're going to sit with Russia from cyber security cooperation." I'm like, what?
That's a joke.
What?
I think that
or to battle terrorism. Like what?
I can tell you that the Russians are one of the few entities around the world that are willing to politicize terrorist threat information. And so I think that they're not a reliable partner. I know they're not a reliable partner on terrorism. Okay. So if we got threat information in the United States and we heard that something was going to happen in Russia, we wouldn't figure out how to leverage that. We wouldn't maybe withhold it, maybe tell them half the information. We would tell them, we would warn them. They would not do the same. If they had terrorism information about anything happening in the United States or any other Western location, they would figure out, their first meeting would be, how do we leverage this? How do we manipulate this information to benefit Russia? So they're not a good partner. They're a terrible partner on terrorism.
Okay. No, cross them off the list. Cross them off the list.
Yes.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah, right. No, absolutely.
Actually, keeping on a little bit more about information, we wanted to ask you, Olga and I wanted to ask you a little bit about what happened with Frances Hogan, in her testimony in Congress. An FB that has the capabilities, we know now, right, and through her testimony that they have the capabilities of curbing, right, disinformation that's on their website, on their platform. And we know that they do because during the elections they did. They tweaked the algorithm for that brief period, but now, right, it's all back. And she was very, she was saying that they do it for profits, basically. I mean, let's be very frank, right? At what point, though, in your view, Stephanie, at what point does government have to intervene? Because it's not a First Amendment issue anymore, but it's an actual national security threat. So what do you think about this? Yeah,
I think the scales have already tipped that the American government's got to get involved in regulating more the social media platforms. The First Amendment is something that Americans, will throw out there for, First Amendment right to whatever. And then they're often wrong when they throw it around. But the First Amendment right is not absolute. I mean, you can't yell fire in a crowded theater is the best example. So you're not allowed to do something that will endanger other people's lives. And I think that we're well beyond the point where we can look at social media platforms and understanding their capability. And I agree, they're fully capable of policing Russian disinformation and finding the source of information much, much easier than they say, we have so many billions of users and too hard. And I just don't agree with that. I think that's nonsense. And I think that the scales have already tipped. Don't think that we're when are we going to get to that point? I think we're well beyond that point. I think in 2016, when we see the way that they were able to manipulate our voting and our democracy, it was, the fat lady was saying
shocking.
At that point. Yeah,
it's shocking.
Shocking.
It's shocking. Absolutely.
And to follow up on that, I mean, we saw January 6th happen. If you would take out the Russia factor, do you think it would get that violent. And then to follow up with that, we see the same players like Steve Bannon, who basically was, attempting to help Bolsonaro in Brazil to do the same style January 6th coup a few last month.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you see this Russian disinformation turning more violent? Like as they're grabbing more people into their fold?
Yeah, I think they're getting bolder and bolder. I think that they see things work. And I think that when they deny things, that a lot of Americans are like, it might not be them. And so I think January 6th was just an escalation. You're beyond the 2016 election cycle and the election cycles thereafter. They're like, we can do more, than just manipulate elections in the United States. We can actually cause violence in the United States. And they did a little bit of that during the election cycle with the Black Lives Matter protests that were completely inventions of the Russians on both sides. And so, January 6th, I don't think Trump would have been as effective at whipping up that base to violence without at least some instruction and assistance from the Russians to be able to manipulate social media, to rally people to the cause, to put out information that's still out there about what's happening in Washington, D.C. and what needs to be done to stop it. So you have everyone who's kind of whipped up by what they see on social media. Then you have the president of the United States who gets out there and really parrots Russian disinformation. How frightening is that? And
I know, my God.
And I think it's
all of them.
It's terrible brew.
Yeah. So his role, in your view, was more aggregator and then incitement. Is that what you're saying? Yeah.
I think that I think that Trump looks at Putin and aspires to be someone like him. Not understanding, not being smart enough to understand, and also just not caring about the effects it has on democracy because it's just power. I think that Putin has instructed him on the way to ascend to power and to stay in power and maintain power. And so, you have someone who's kind of being instructed by the Russians on how to do something like this, and we can assist with something like this. And so you have the Russian disinformation online piece, and then you have Trump coming out there and making statements. He didn't say much, and he has his own plausible deniability. All I told them was, to stop the steal, or it's all I said. I didn't tell them to, break through the windows. So it doesn't matter because that was on social media. So it was the combination of the two, and we're off to the races.
Yeah. Wow.
And what's more dangerous is that, because I follow Russian media and social media, Russian politicians on January 7th came out and said, oh my God, these are political prisoners they're searching for. And I think at that point it was because of what was happening with Navalny. So they kind of wanted to, make a comparison with the protesters there. But then they saw that it caught on, this, that these are political prisoners. And then by March or maybe April, I see it here being parroted by Republicans. And then I see this back and forth where you have Russian politicians, up to Putin himself and the foreign minister, Lavrov, saying, oh, these political prisoners, they need to be released. We need to appeal for them. And then you have, again, here, the Republicans who are parroting the same thing. And I was like, this is unbelievable. And what can we do as far as that, with the Republican Party, who have gone this far to choose working with our adversaries in order to keep power? Yeah.
It's so difficult. I mean, because they are in power, they're elected by their people, so they're already in positions of power. I just think that the social media platforms, I mean, it's all the sensitive balance of them trying to make money. And I think it's important for social media companies to out the source of the disinformation that is parroted by various centers like, Josh Hawley or even Lindsey Graham. Right. They come out with these ridiculous statements, which really their origin is in Russia. And so, I mean, I think the only thing that can be done is the social media company, go head to head with that. And I don't know how you make that happen, because social media companies are worried about government regulation and they don't want it. And so I think there's this kind of symbiotic relationship that's developing, which is, the social media companies will kind of let it go, and it'll be parroted by the politicians, and this law will all be, kind of, under the table cooperation where, politicians who want to cling to power, like Lindsey Graham, for example, or Ted Cruz, they get tons in donations whenever they parrot something that's Russian disinformation that makes the disenfranchised feel better. And, this happened back, all the way to, when Michael Flynn was just, out campaigning with Trump. The most chilling moment is when, for me, is when he got up on the stage and talked about Hillary Clinton and said, "Yeah, lock her up." I thought, that doesn't happen in the United States. We don't lock up political adversaries. They do that in Russia, but they don't do it here.
Absolutely.
And having seen Flynn sitting next to Putin at that dinner the year before, like, you just don't get to sit next to Putin at a dinner randomly. And so,
Well, go back a few years.
Well,
go back a few years, and Flynn apparently visited GRU headquarters and laid wreaths for GRU members. So, I mean, you don't see that happening either. So,
I think that Michael Flynn wasn't seasoned enough. Didn't understand. That's the best spin you can put on this. He just didn't understand. He was in over his head. But at this point, I tend to think it's worse.
Yeah. Well, also because with your experience, right, as you said, right, it's not like you just walk in and sit down beside Putin, right?
Right.
You know the way things work. So.
Yeah, and he should have known that. He's director of DIA, and he's supposed to be this Russian expert. And, if I was sat down at a dinner next to Vladimir Putin, I'd be like, whoa.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Stephanie, how many theaters have you worked in?
Let's see. I specialized in counterterrorism, which spanned the Middle East. Which really
right.
I think that Saudi Arabia was my main focus.
Okay.
When I was in the Counterterrorism Center the first time, and also the second time. But I also worked, the former Warsaw Pact countries. And I lived in Russia, and so I kind of have this unique combination, and so. When I see the terrorist tactics being used by the Russians, I'm like, oh, danger.
Yeah, you have your radar out. That's it. You can see it. I
have a question. Being that you, gathered intelligence, do you think part of this wishy-washy, people not understanding Russia's a threat is because the administrations, several now, have not, listed Russia as a threat, and we don't have a clear foreign policy towards Russia? Because like in the 70s, 80s, 60s, 70s, 80s, we were in the Cold War, and people knew if I work with Soviets, I am a traitor. And we had very few cases, but it was like a handful of cases versus now where people are parroting their disinformation, conducting operations, taking their money and whatnot. Do you think if, there was a clearer foreign policy crafted on what Russia is to us, then it could cut out a lot of the lobbyists and the attorneys and the propagandists and, and help educate Americans of that Russia is a threat?
Yeah, Olga, I think you've hit it on the head. I mean, there's administration after administration, and it really is both parties. I mean, Trump was was bad on steroids, so he's gonna have to take him out of the category. But even right now, I mean, there's not the aggression against Russia that could be. I mean, I think that I find it sometimes befuddling when I hear people from the State Department now saying, "Well, we have to consider Russia," and I'm like, they have they have an economy smaller than Italy's. Sorry, Monique, but I'm Italian too. It's small in Italy's. And so.
No, we know.
Yeah. And so they just insert themselves, and they're really not a player. They'll never really be at the big boy table. Yes, they're on the UN Security Council. And Germany, strangely, is not.
Yeah.
I mean,
France
so we do have to take into, we do have to have nuclear talks with them, but we are in the driver's seat. We are so much more powerful than Russia. And, we are like a Great Dane and they are like a Chihuahua. And so the hesitancy is befuddling to me. And sometimes I don't really understand what the entire issue is, that we can't be more forceful with them.
Same.
Yeah.
Same.
Yeah, we talk about this all the time.
Yeah, because it's like, being, again, from that region, like, I just don't understand why everyone makes Putin into a strongman. I'm like, my God, he's like a mafia thug that started with nothing. And here he is dictating how countries, act. And I'm like, what? Why? Like, you could just give him one good shove. And that's it. And no one is even saying to go into war with them. Like, and if you say sanctioned, like Putin's inner circle, suddenly, but they're a nuclear power. I'm like, first of all, their military equipment falls apart, even on their Victory Day parade. Like, their tanks are smoking and falling over. That's so true. It's like, just because they have nuclear weapons does not mean that they have to, kind of be like terrorists, having a grip on how everybody responds to them, and there has to be a better way.
Yeah, I mean, the Russians fully understand, too, that they can never beat the U.S. militarily.
No. No.
And so, but the only way they could do is this asymmetric warfare,
which is the disinformation that we're seeing. Exactly. In cyber.
And they're cleaning our clock because people just don't understand this is the war. I don't mean to be dramatic, but we're in the war right now.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I mean, I speak to a lot of people, and in fact,
and one
they say,
simply solved.
Well, no. Yes. Well, because everybody says, but they're nuclear. They have nuclear weapons. I said, they're not going to throw nuclear weapons where they have bank accounts.
No, absolutely not. Pakistan's got nuclear weapons too. And we're not like, we have to consult Pakistan before we do whatever.
Exactly. No.
I just think Russia, sadly, is better at, Putin, instead of investing in tanks and military equipment, invest in buying influence. And that way, then you have people who kind of stop the policies maybe moving forward.
Yeah.
But they're definitely not the superpower. Putin will never be a superpower on the world stage.
No.
He's just a clever little guy. We always do the old.
That's it. Let's use that. Stephanie, I think we're going to end with he's just a little guy.
Okay.
Shrimp in a basket.
Because we're going to continue our conversation.
Okay.
But we're going to say goodbye to you now.
Okay.
And thank you, Stephanie. Stephanie, what are you doing now? Just very quickly so that people can keep up with you and what you're doing.
Well, I'm on Twitter. It's Steph C. Hartell. Yeah. Right now, I just wrote a book, and it'll be interesting to see.
Great!
It's an espionage book, and I've sent out just to one agent just to see whether I brace myself for rejections. I understand how this all works. But we're going to do this again.
Two people who will buy it right away. So,
yes.
Hey, everybody, if you enjoyed this podcast, don't forget to subscribe and please visit our website, kremlinfile.com, and find our links to our socials in the show notes. This is Season 1, Kremlin File, hosted by Olga and me, Monique Camargo. This is a Bunker Crew Media production with executive producers Marley Clements, Jack Bryan, Grant DeSimone, Ben, Brett, and Jordy Mycelis of Meidas Media, with associate producers Ruby Frankel and Sarah Metz. Theme music by Oreste Camargo. Sound editing and mixing by Joy Ellett. Subscribe to Kremlin File wherever you listen to podcasts.